Hello world, welcome to Sunday. Well, it's evening, almost evening. So I'm going to do a little Bible reading and singing on playing on the piano for you. So I'm going to read, and I'm going to read a couple stories from the Bible, and I'm really talking about, I know you've probably heard this term, bloom where you're planted, where God has put you, bloom where you are. And that is a thing that I have endeavored to do. You may be like me. You may not particularly like where you're planted. You may not want to be where you're planted. You may want to be somewhere else. But if that is where he has you and where he needs you for now, you've got to do like I do. Trust and hope and pray that you're not going to be there forever. And that he needs you there for a time for people that he needs you to reach. So I'm going to read a couple of stories. One is about Joseph and the other is about Ruth. I'm first going to read from Colossians 3:23. This says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters. Hello, welcome. So wherever you are and wherever God has put you and whatever work you are doing, if you work at it and do it as if it was you were doing it for God and not for people or not for just doing tasks, if you say I'm doing this because it's pleasing to God, you find it a lot easier to do. At least I do. It's not maybe physically easier, but it is more, you have more motivation to do it. And it's not maybe such a drudgery if you say, God has put me here because I'm in need, or someone is in need for me here. Genesis 39, 1-6 is part of the story of Joseph. And as you know, his brothers were jealous of him because his father gave him a coat and he had all these dreams. And they said, we've had enough of him. He's our younger brother. Let's get rid of him. And so they sold him to, they were originally going to kill him, but then they said, no, let's don't have his blood on our hands. Let's sell him to these people coming by and they'll take him to Egypt and he won't live with us anymore. So they sold him. And it says, now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph. I think this is so significant because no matter where you are, even if you had been kidnapped, even if you had been sold into slavery by your brothers, even if you had been taken to a foreign land against your will or a place against your will, it still says the Lord was with him. So no matter where you find yourself and you think, why did I end up here? How did I end up here? Why am I in this place? Wherever that place may be, whether it's a job or whether it's a place you're living or whether it's people you're around that you don't want to be with, it says the Lord was with Joseph. So no matter where you are, even though it may not be the place you want to be, the Lord is with you. And it says, and he was a successful man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. So he was in Potiphar's house. And it says he was successful. That's pretty amazing. He was a slave. How many have you ever heard of a slave being successful? How could he be successful? He couldn't go out on his own and have his own business. He couldn't do anything other than what he was told to do. But he was so blessed with God being with him, he was able to even be successful as a slave. So if you look at your current situation, maybe you have the lowest job in your company, or maybe you just say, well, I'm just working here at this place that there's no room for advancement, there's not good opportunities, or maybe you're retired and you're saying that there's nothing for me to do here. That didn't matter to somebody who was a slave. It didn't matter to God. He still made Joseph successful wherever he was in whatever condition. God's not limited by that. He can still make you successful. If nothing else, you can be spiritually successful. You don't have to be financially successful. Because even though Joseph was successful, because he was a slave, he would have been maybe increasing income and stuff, but it wouldn't have been his. So he wasn't at this time being self-successful as far as finances were concerned, because he couldn't have earned money. But he was bringing still success, other success. And it says, and his master saw that the Lord was with him. I find that very interesting because this is an Egyptian. They did not serve God. They may or may not really even have believed there was a God. They had their own gods. They had the Egyptian idol gods and the false gods that they worshipped, gods that they had kind of invented. They had their own gods. So I find it interesting that this man who was an Egyptian would have been brought up with those gods and worshiping those gods that were in Egypt. It says he saw that the Lord was with him. Well, isn't that interesting? Because he wouldn't have been a man who worshiped the Lord, but yet he must have still known that the real Lord existed. And he saw that he was with Joseph, and he may not have understood everything, but he could see there's a God, and that God is with this man. It says he saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. So even he must have realized that Joseph could not have been being this successful just by himself. It had to be God. It had to be God. Because who is successful as a slave? So Joseph found favor in his sight and served him. So he's very pleased. He loved Joseph. He cared about Joseph because, why? Because this man was making more money and being more successful. He was the one actually receiving the success at the time that Joseph was producing. And says, then he made him overseer of his house. So he had the lowest position, but not anymore. Although he still was a slave. But he had the top slave position in the house. He was overseer of the whole house. He was like manager. He was the manager of the house now. And all that he had, he put under his authority. So this man trusted him. It's a big thing to have somebody's trust. A big thing. He trusted him to do right and to bring this success. So it was from that time that he made him an overseer of his house and all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. So the Lord said, since this man has advanced my servant and my child Joseph, since this man has advanced him and is blessing him in the ability that he's able to as a slave, he said, I am now going to bless this man's house for Joseph's sake. I like it that he did it. He's really doing it for Joseph. He wasn't doing it for a man who really wasn't even serving him. He was doing it for Joseph, but that helped Joseph to be advanced. Thus he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he did not know what he had, except for the bread which he ate. He trusted him so much. He gave him everything to be in charge of, all his money, all his staff, everything in the house. He didn't even know what was there. He's like, I trust you so much. I know you are not going to do anything wrong, and I don't even know what I have anymore, except I know I've got this bread, which I'm eating in my hand. So he just totally said, it's all yours to take care of, all yours. I don't even need to pay attention. Then we know what happened. We know Potiphar's wife was wanting to seduce him, and he was a godly man, which I think everybody needs to take a leaf out of this book, please. He was a godly man and said, no, I will not do this evil against my master, and I will not do this evil against God. It was against the man's, against the woman's husband, and it was against God's law. It was also against God's law, and he said, I will not do it, not for a moment's pleasure, not for a little pleasure here or there. No, I will not do wrong. But we know his wife was angry. She grabbed his coat. When her husband came home, she wailed, oh, he tried to attack me. And I guess because she had the coat and he had run because he was afraid. Well, he was running because she was trying to force him to be with her. So because of that, it looked suspicious, I guess, to him. And he thought, oh, how could he do this to me? So he was upset. He thought his wife was telling the truth, sadly. And Genesis 39:19-23 says, then Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in the prison. So how sad is that you were being blessed? Sometimes things like this happen. You think I'm being advanced. The people who are over me are pleased with me. I am doing right. I am bringing success to this company. I'm bringing success to my overseer. I am being blessed of God, and then all of a sudden it all goes south. Now, sometimes it doesn't, but sometimes it does. And you think, well, I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't cause this to happen. But something was done wrong against you. And now he's not a slave. Now he's in prison. So he had a bad situation that just went worse. And it says he was there in the prison. It says, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. So even though his situation just went from really bad to a lot worse. Why did that happen, though? Why? There were people in the prison I think God needed him to minister to. There were people there, the people that had the dreams, they needed him to interpret the dreams because it all led to him later interpreting a dream for Pharaoh. He had that all planned, and he had to get him to that prison so he could interpret those dreams. But see, he didn't say, oh man, Lord, I have been doing right. I even resisted that woman who tempted me and did not sleep with her when she wanted me to. I resisted it, and I still get punished for it, and I didn't do it. I'm being punished for something I didn't do. He didn't, as far as we know, he didn't say that. He maybe have thought it, he may have felt it, but he said, no, I am still going to be the God wants me in the prison, I guess. So at least I won't have that woman after me anymore. Maybe he was kind of relieved. I'm going to be put in the prison. But you know, when you were in the prison, you were subject to possibly being killed, because we know of the butler and the baker that were of Pharaoh. Pharaoh had the butler killed. So, you know, prison was like the next step before they might kill you. So it was a dangerous place to be, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy. So even though he was in a bad place, in a place I know he didn't want to be, in a place he never wanted to be, in a place he wanted to get out of and didn't know when or if he would ever be able to get out, the Lord was with him and showed him mercy. So even though he probably got up every day and said, Lord, I don't want to be here. And Lord, why do you have me confined in this place? Why am I just here when I could be out? I was doing so well where I was. Why has that been cut off? And now I'm like in a pit here. Why? But he just did what God wanted him to do wherever he found himself. Even though he may have been discouraged, we don't know, but he just did what was the right thing, the next right thing to do. I don't know if you've heard that saying before, just do the next right thing. If you don't know what to do the next right thing. Just do the next thing that's right. And I think that's what he did. Whatever came before him, he did what God wanted him to do in that situation. It says, and the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. So again, he was put in charge of everything in this prison. Over all the people, over any activities they did. I don't know what they did, but whatever was done, he did it. So he again was made manager of this. So God was still advancing him, even in the lowest of low places. And the keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority. So he didn't even say, I'm going to check what he's doing. I'm going to see what if he's doing it right. He knew. He had such a reputation and was such standing and following the path of righteousness that God had before him that people didn't even wonder if he might be doing wrong. Do you have a reputation like that? Have you ever thought about that you can have such a reputation that people could say, here, I'm going to trust everything I have to you, because I know it's going to be right. And I'm not even going to have to come check to see if you're sneaking something, because I know you're doing it right. That's a good, godly reputation to have. It says, because the Lord was with him. That's why, again, this jailer would have been an Egyptian. He wouldn't have been a worshiper and follower of God. He would have been following the Egyptian idols and the Egyptian gods that they had come up with. False gods. He would have been following the false gods, but still, these people must have recognized there was a real God here. I think they thought their other ones were real too, but they had to see there was a difference here because things were happening. This has to be a God that's moving. This has to be a God that's taking action. And it says, whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. Even in prison. Can you imagine being successful and prospering in prison? Not many people do. But because God was with him, Joseph was. You know, in our day, many years ago, decades ago, I feel like that, you know, our nation was more of a Christian nation. There seemed to be more widespread Christianity, people who knew about God, people who went to church, their kids went to Sunday school. There were always lost people, but they seemed to be fewer than the ones who were following and serving God. Now it's kind of flipped the other way. There are so many people in our nation that really don't believe in God, don't know God, and there are even a lot that think they do. They think they're serving God because they believe there is a God, and they're really not following him. They're not serving him. They don't even, have they even read his, what he says to do, and are they doing what he says to do? Probably not. A lot aren't. But some absolutely are completely lost. There are a lot of lost people around us now, is what I'm saying. And I believe Joseph was put in this, he was sent to a whole other country in Egypt. He was surrounded by everyone around him that was a lost person. Everyone. No one there was going to be serving the Israelite God. They were serving the Egyptian gods. They were not serving the true God. He was the only one in the whole country. The only one in the whole country that was serving God. And yet he stayed faithful and maintained his righteous walk with God. And because of that, the people that saw him said, God's with him. They didn't even know God, but they knew because he was so different. They knew God was there. And I think God was bringing him to people not only to save his family later with the famine, but I believe he was bringing light to this dark country. If there was anyone there who could possibly turn to God and follow God, they were going to be seeing his light, and they were seeing it in Joseph. He was the only light. He was the only one there. He was their only access to God at all. And God sent him there, I think, to show them the light as well, because, God loved the Egyptians too. He knew they weren't serving him. He knew that they weren't his people, but he created those people too. He loved those people too. I'm sure he wanted them to see his light and to turn to him. He wanted them to. And Joseph was like his evangelist. He was sending him there so they could see. And they were seeing it because first Potiphar says it, and then the prison guard says it, and it says they saw that God was with him. They were, whether they turned to God or not, I don't know, but they were finding out who God was. They were saying God is with him. They weren't saying our Egyptian God is with him. No, they weren't saying that. They were saying God, like the real, the one, the true God is with this man. They saw the real God that they had probably never seen in their life. They saw him because of one man, one person in their country, one person in the whole country. True, it's not as big a country as what we have, but it still was just one man. Could you be the one person where you are, whether you are in a facility, whether you are in a place of employment, whether you are in a group of friends or something somewhere, wherever you are, could you be the only one? It's possible in America now. It didn't used to be. It used to be that there were just so many more people that were serving God. But it's possible in America now that you could go to some group or some event or some employment place or something, and you could possibly be the only true Christian, really honestly following God there. You could be the only light, and God is putting you there because those people are lost, and he loves them just like he did these Egyptians. He loved them. He wanted to show them the light, and this was their light. Maybe you are the light where you are, and even if you say, well, I don't go anywhere and I'm stuck here, you still can be a light and pray. Even if you can't see people face to face, you can pray for them. You can hear people, you can see people around. Even if you don't see the people you're around, you can sit there and pray for them. You don't have to know their names. You can say, all right, Lord, I know there's somebody over there, somebody up here, and somebody up there. Lord, I'm praying for them because I don't know that they know you, and maybe I see or hear actions going on around them. I don't think they know you, and Lord, they need prayer, and I'm praying for them. And I'm making my list, and I'm adding all these people that I come across even just across the window, across your sight, or maybe they're next to you, or maybe they're near you. If you're I'm in an apartment, there's a bunch of people around here, and I really don't hardly know them, but I could still pray for them even if I don't see them face to face, and I don't know their lives. I don't know if they serve God or not, but just in case they don't, maybe I'm here for that light. Maybe I'm at my place of employment where I don't want to be for that light. I've always wanted to be a homemaker. I still felt God could use me that way too, because I would still be reaching out. I would still be working in the church because I would have time to do that. I would still be reaching, and I've done that before. I taught children's church. I sang in choir. I did a lot of things in church, so I still felt like I was always reaching out in some way. But, maybe God has another person that you are the one, wherever you're at, that you're the one that can either be praying for them, or you're the one that can talk to them, or that you may be the person that they need. They may be failing. They may be falling. Their faith may be gone there, or never have been there, or they may be struggling, and you may be the person that he's putting there to bring them strength. Ruth 2:1-16 says, and this is the story now of Ruth, and as you know, Naomi and her husband, Elimelech, they left their home country because I think they said there was a famine. And so they went to the land of the Moabites, and while they were there, their two grown sons married two women there, and then all the men died. Her husband died, and both her sons died. She had a pretty rough time, didn't she? She had a pretty rough time. She lost everything. She never had grandchildren. Both of her daughters-in-law, actually that is, both of her daughters-in-law didn't have children. And she left with nothing. When she went back to her home country, she even said, they said, oh, hello, Ruth, Naomi rather. Naomi, you've come back. And she said, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. Mara means bitter because I left here empty and I left here full and God sent me home empty. I have nothing now. I have nothing. And I understand her feeling, as I certainly feel that way. But Ruth, her daughter-in-law, went with her and said, she even tried to get her, no, stay here with your mother. Maybe you can remarry here in your home country. I'm not going to have any more children. I'm an older lady. I have no more husband. And you don't want to wait, even if I could have more children, you don't want to wait for them to grow up to marry them, because that's what they did. They married their relatives. And, you don't want to follow me. You'll be a lonely old maid. Well, she had been married, so she'd been a lonely widow. And she said, no, I'm going to follow you and I'm going to take care of you. And it says, now there was a relative of Naomi's husband, a man of great wealth, of the family of Elimelech. His name was Boaz. So Ruth, the Moabitess, said to Naomi, please let me go to the field and glean heads of grain after him, in whose sight I may find favor. So they were poor. They had nothing. Remember, they came back with nothing, and they were staying somewhere. And she said, let me go pick up grains from the field. And so what they would do is they would at least have something to eat. Maybe they could have sold a little of it and made bread and sold it, or maybe they just had something to eat. And so she said, let me go and glean, meaning just pick up. So what they would do is the harvesters would go in the field of the grain, and they would harvest all this grain, and they would pick it up in big bundles, but the bits of it would fall. And the people who were very, very poor would go behind them, and it would be on the ground, and it would have been walked over by all the harvesters. It had been stomped on. It would be kind of, but it was still edible. And so they would go pick it up, and at least they'd have a little something to eat. And they would take this grain, and they would thresh the grain, and then they would grind it and make flour, and so they could have something to eat. And so she said to her mother-in-law, let me go beg for grain, is really kind of what she's saying. Let me go to the fields, and I'll walk through the fields and go behind the harvesters, and I'll pick up stuff off the ground. At least we can have the grain. And Naomi said to her, go, my daughter. Then she left and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. So again, they were following the people harvesting. And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz. So they were going through lots of fields. And she came to the one that belonged to him, and he was of the family of Elimelech, which was her father-in-law. He was a relative. Now behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered him, the Lord bless you. I think that here we go right here. It's already showing you Boaz is a godly man. Because the first thing he says when he comes back from his trip to Bethlehem is he says to his workers, this is also a man who cares about his workers. He's treating them well. He says to his workers, the Lord be with you. He's pronouncing a blessing on them, and he is talking about the Lord. This is a man following God and doing right. And they answered him, the Lord bless you. So you can see he had a good relationship with his workers. Even the lowest of workers, he was blessing them. And Boaz said to his servant who was in charge of the reapers, whose young woman is this? Because he saw her, and he probably thought she was the servant, because you had to be really, really poor to be doing this. And so she probably thought she was a slave or servant or something. So he thought she belonged to somebody. He said, whose young woman is this? So the servant, because he hadn't seen her before. And so this also tells you he cared enough for his workers. He knew who all they were. Even the servants, he knew who people were. He was a person who cared about people. I just think this makes him such a good man. So the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered and said, it is a young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. And she said, please let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. So she came and has continued from morning until now, though she rested a little in the house. So it's like she's been working this whole day. She rested a little bit, but other than that, she's been working this whole day. She's been gleaning, meaning picking up these leftovers. Then Boaz said to Ruth, you will listen, my daughter, will you not? Do not go glean in another field, nor go from here, but stay close by my young women. Let your eyes be on the field which they reap, and go after them. Have I not commanded the young men not to touch you? So what he was saying is, don't go to somebody else's field. You might not be safe. Stay here, and you watch my other servant girls, and the other, let's see, what does it say? Stay by my young women. So he's talking about stay with my servant girls. And wherever they are going and harvesting, you follow after them. So in other words, he's telling her, stay in a group. Stay in a group where you will look like you belong, and that you will be safe. And he says, I've commanded the young men not to touch you. I bet he threatened them. Don't you dare lay a hand on her. He's probably told that about his other servant girls too. He had them doing right. He had warned the men working for him, you better not touch these women. They are my servants. So he was protecting them as well. And it says, and when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn. Now I find that quite astounding if you think about it. In those days, the women were subservient to the men, and particularly when it came to eating or drinking. So if the men wanted a drink, usually the women brought it to them. So when he's telling her, when you're thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn. So he apparently must have had the men draw their own drink, their water, and he was telling her, go drink the men's water. That was like... Women did not do that. Even high elevated women didn't go drink the men's stuff. That, they would serve the men their dinner and their drink, and then the women would go eat, because that was just the culture. That's what they did then. And the fact that he is telling her, you can go drink the water the men drew out. Don't go draw your own water. Don't do that extra work. The men will draw their own water and you can drink theirs. That's pretty high elevation, actually, just with water. So she fell on her face because she knew that. She's like, oh my word, he's telling me to drink the men's water. She fell on her face, bowed down to the ground, and said to him, why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? I just think this is such a beautiful picture of what God does for us. Even though she was in dire circumstances, she was in grief, she had lost her husband, she had never had children, so she was childless, she was husbandless, she was taking care of her elderly mother-in-law, who also, probably the mother-in-law was maybe not able to go glean, or she probably would have gone too. She was probably older. It was too hard for her to do. So she was doing it for the two of them. She was doing the extra work. But yet God, in this, like an example of Boaz, he was protecting her. I've said people aren't going to protect you. I'm giving you what. Doesn't this sound like the 23rd Psalm? I am your shepherd. You shall not want. I am laying a table for you in the midst of your enemies. I am protecting you. I'm leading you beside still waters. And he told her, go drink the young men's waters. Isn't this sound like that? Like the shepherd who takes care of us. And even though you're going through the valley of the shadow of death, you'll fear no evil, because I'm with you. This is what he did for her. And it's an example of what God does for us. You might be in the midst of evil. You might be in dire circumstances. You might be just picking up scraps of food that have been left on the ground and people are trampling on. That's the only wheat that you get, or whatever the grain was. But I'm protecting you, and I'm watching you. I'm providing you living water, and it's not going to stay that way. And Boaz answered and said to her, it has been fully reported to me all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, and how you have left your father and your mother in the land of your birth, and have come to a people whom you did not know before. The Lord repay your work, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. She had come to the Israelite God. Because, when she came with Naomi, when she came back to Israel and Naomi tried to get her to stay in Moab, she said, no, I'm going to come with you, and your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. So she is saying, I am going to serve the true God. Nope, that's the God I'm going to serve, and you and your people will be my people. You're going to be my family, and I'm going to serve your God. So she basically came to God for refuge. And Boaz is saying to her, the Lord's going to repay your work. Boy, didn't he repay her work. She became the mistress of the land. She was a slave, almost. She really wasn't a slave, but she was in the position of being no better than a slave. She was poor, and she was gleaning just stuff out of the dirt to be able to eat. And later she marries Boaz, and he says he was a wealthy man. She became a wife of a wealthy man in this field that she had to walk on and pick up scraps of stuff to eat. Now she owned. Now really her husband owned, but when he married her, it became hers as well. She became the mistress of the house. She became the top position that a woman could have at that time, which was the wife of a wealthy man that was good to her. He wasn't just a wealthy old scroungy guy. He was a good man that was protecting and taking care of her. And she came from the lowliest point to the highest point overnight. Overnight. And he pronounced this blessing on her. The Lord repay your work, and a full reward be given to you. She not only got that, she got to have a child with him. She was no longer a childless woman. She got to have descendants. And one of her descendants was King David. and later Jesus. So she got to have some pretty hefty descendants. She wasn't left a woman to die in this earth and have no offspring and nothing left of her in this earth. She got to have a child that carried on her genetics in her life. And so the Lord repaid her for what she was doing. And then she said, let me find favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have comforted me. You know, she needed comfort. This says right here, you've comforted me. That means she was not enjoying what she was doing. That means she was hurting. That means she was, before this, was not comforted. She was suffering. But yet she was doing right. She was not where she wanted to be and not doing what she wanted to do. Didn't have the life she'd expected. She got married. She expected to be a wife and a mother. She expected to have a home of her own, that she could be the woman of the house. She expected that, and she got none of it. She lost her husband. She never got to have children up until that time. She was left desolate. They were broke. She had nothing. She followed her mother-in-law to a foreign place to her. And yet she followed God and was doing right. And she wasn't even originally a child of God. She was a Moabite, a foreigner. But yet she turned to the Israelite God, the true God, and she followed him. But yet, even though she was doing right, in the midst of her doing right, she must have felt heartbroken. She must have been hurting. She must have been struggling, because she said to him, you have comforted me. She needed comfort, and he brought her comfort. Just like when we are hurting and God can come to us and give us comfort. And she says, you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your maidservant, though I am not like one of your maidservants. She was a foreigner and didn't expect people to be kind to her. She expected them to go, oh, you are a foreigner. She expected people to not accept her. But he spoke kind to her, brought her comfort, and protected her. Now Boaz said to her at mealtime, come here and eat of the bread, and dip your piece of bread in the vinegar. Now first I think, I don't want bread and vinegar, but I guess it must have been good to them. But he told her to come eat with him. Servants didn't generally go eat with the master. But he said, come here and eat of the bread and dip your piece of bread in the vinegar. To me, that's like the 23rd Psalm where God is, I didn't even think of this 23rd Psalm, the stuff ahead of time. It's just coming to me now. Where God says, I'm preparing a table before you in the presence of your enemies. I'm going to feed you. And he's feeding you in his own presence. God's preparing a table before you. He's not preparing the table before you and leaving. He is preparing the table before you and staying there with you. You are eating and being nourished with him there. And this is what Boaz did. Come here and eat of the bread, dip your piece of bread in the vinegar. So she sat beside the reapers, because they apparently were all together, sat beside the reapers, and he passed parched grain to her. So apparently this man did not look down on his servants, because he was eating with them. It said she sat beside the reapers, so they were all together, and Boaz was there too, and he passed parched grain to her. So they must have like roasted it, and he passed it to her himself. And she ate. You know, he was treating her like he was a servant and said, honoring her. He was honoring her. And I feel that this is what, if you are following and obeying God and you are working for him and ministering, she was ministering to Naomi. Naomi couldn't go glean in the fields, obviously, or she would have. She probably was not physically able to do it. It was probably too hard for her because she was older. But Ruth could do it, and she was ministering to Naomi, another child of God. And because she was ministering where God had placed her to minister, she was now being ministered to by a wealthy man. And it isn't just because he's wealthy, but that's his position. He was a higher position than her. He was the highest position probably in the land, the wealthier landowners. And she was dirt poor. And yet he is serving her. First of all, men didn't serve women. And rich, wealthier people didn't serve dirt poor people. It was the other way around. But yet he's honoring her, just like God honors us. Even if we're in dire circumstances, he still is serving us and giving us what we need. It says, and she ate and was satisfied and kept some back. So that means she ate, she was full, she had more, she had extra, so she got to take some home. And when she rose up to glean, because there was still more work to be done, Boaz commanded his young men, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves. So remember, I was telling you that they picked up what was dropped on the ground. that they had probably, because they're picking up these long little skinny reeds of stuff and picking it, and this stuff is just kind of falling everywhere. And then they're walking over it. So it's going to be smashed and it's going to be dusty and dirty and stuff. Is still edible, but it's kind of not pristine anymore. So he tells her, let her glean even among the sheaves. In other words, let her pick it while it's still on the stalk. Don't just make her pick up the scroungy stuff on the ground. Let her pick the fresh stuff that hasn't been trampled on and is all dirty and smashed. Let her pick from the stalks. See, they didn't let the poor people generally do that. They just let them pick up what fell on the ground. But he's honoring her again by saying, let her have the good stuff. Let her have the good stuff. It says, let her glean even among the sheaves and do not reproach her. In other words, don't you say a word against her. You let her do it. And also, let grain from the bundles. So they would take all this grain and bundle it up. He says, let grain from the bundles fall purposely for her. He was saying, throw some down. Throw down extra. Because, they would gather as much as they possibly could. There really wasn't a whole lot left on the ground. But he was saying, let her pick it from the stalk. And then put extra down. Make sure she gets a lot. Take that out of the bundles that you've all bundled up. And let it fall down on purpose. So she has more to pick up. Leave it. So in other words, when you let it fall down, don't pick it up. Leave it, that she may glean, and do not rebuke her. This was a woman, just like Joseph, that no matter where she was in the circumstances she was in, she was blooming where she was planted. She was following God. She was obeying God. She was doing what was right. And God was blessing her. And at the end, we know he blessed her because she married that man, as I said, and got to have a child. She may have had more children, we don't know, but she at least had one child. And she got to live in that, whatever his house was. She got to be over everyone and everything. She now would have been in charge of that home because the wife of the house was in charge of the household. So she would have been at the top instead of the bottom now, all because she was following God when she was at the bottom. And because she was following God and obeying him and ministering to someone while she was at the bottom, God promoted her to the top. Just like Joseph. He was ministering to the lost Egyptians and saving, basically Joseph was there to save the world. Because the world was, the known world, the surrounding world was experiencing this famine and they all would have died. God put him there to save the world, but he had to minister to some people first beforehand. And I'm going to sing a song now. I actually just thought of another one too, right before I came on. But the first song I'm going to sing, unless you were in my church in the late 1970s and working with me in children's church, which is where I was working at that time, you've never heard this song before. If you were working in children's church at that time, you've heard it. There's probably 2 or 3 people in my family that have heard this song, and that's it. Otherwise, you have never heard this song because it's never been published. So when we were doing children's church at that time, I was a teenager, and the people that were in charge of children's church and planning and everything in children's church were my dad and another man in the church named Jim Gent. And they were the teachers. Jim Gent was a teacher in regular school, and then he was... we were doing puppets. Jim was in charge of the puppets, and Dad was in charge of like standing out and teaching the children's church class. And every week they would get together and they would plan their theme. Now see, now if you want to work in children's ministries now, there's all kind of stuff there's literature, there's music, there's all kind of stuff, there's skits, there's all kind of stuff you can do, all kind of resources. Back then there were not. So they didn't really have a lot of anything that they could use. There was Sunday school literature, but that was already being used in Sunday school. So they had to have something for children's church, and there really wasn't anything until sometime in the late 80s when they started producing some. The company started producing it, and they started making tapes, and I mean cassette tapes, of children's songs. But before then, you couldn't get children's songs on tape. There were no CDs or downloading nothings. You couldn't get that. You had to get a book with music in it or just know some songs. If you wanted to sing children's songs, there really weren't a whole lot of children's themed songs. There was Jesus Loves Little Children, Jesus Loves Me, This Little Light of Mine, a few little songs like that. But you don't sing if you sing those every week, that gets a little old. There just weren't a lot. And there were no puppet skits, and we were doing puppets. And so Jim Gent, my dad and Jim Gent would get together, and they would come up with a theme, and Jim would write the puppet skits, wrote them. They wrote books of them. There's so many of them. They wrote all these puppet skits, and they were good too. They were really good. But we would find songs and teach the kids. We usually would only sing about one song during this era. Later, I became in charge of children's church, started being able to have resources for music for children where we could have a whole lot more. But before, when I was a teenager still in the late 70s and we were doing this where they had to write everything, we were coming up a little short of some songs for the kids. Other than, well, we've sang that, I'm like, already sang that last week and the week before, so we need something new. So now Jim Gent was not a musical person particularly. He could not play an instrument that I know of. I don't believe he sang. Now his wife could play the piano. And, she could play the organ as well. But he wanted a new song. So lo and behold, he wrote one. Now how does somebody who doesn't really know music write a song? But he did. He actually wrote a couple of them. And I'm going to sing one that he wrote today. He wrote one, and then we're doing a theme about being a flower in the garden of God, being a flower in his garden. And that's the song. The name of the song is I'm a Flower in His Garden. And that's where what I'm using this is the theme of God's planted you somewhere, so bloom. I saw something recently on Facebook that said, you feel like you've been buried, maybe you've been planted, so bloom. I love that. Wherever you are, bloom for God, because he must need you there. He must need you there to reach someone. And if you don't know who, maybe they're not there yet. Maybe they'll cross your path at some point, or maybe it's somebody you don't know that's needing it, and you just don't see them, but they see you. And so this song he wrote, and he didn't know music, so he kind of just could sing this little tune, and the words, he wrote the words and sung this little tune, and his wife picked it out on the piano, and they brought it to me at church because I played the piano, and they said, can you play this song? And I'm like, oh, yeah. And so I went through and played. Yes, I could play. It was very simple. It's just a little chorus. And the next week, they still were having that theme, and so he wrote another verse to the song. It's really, even though it was written for children's church, it fits anybody. You don't have to be a child. And I always loved this song, and I don't still have it written somewhere. Maybe it's somewhere written somewhere. I couldn't find it. But luckily, I still remembered it from the late 70s. I remember the words. I remember the tune. I wrote it, I put it in a little higher key, but I remember the song, so I can sing this for you, and it's really a neat little song. And like I said, unless you were there in children's church when I was there when I was a teenager, you've never heard this song. And so it'll be a new song for you. And then as I was singing that, I was thinking all week, what song can go with it? So I can not maybe sing just one little chorus. Is there something else? I could not think of anything until I sat down to write out the notes and the chords to this. And of course, like last second, another song comes to me, and I'm like, oh, I forgot all about that song. That's a beautiful song. So I'm going to throw the chorus of that song into, I'm not sure when that one came from. It probably came out about the 70s or so as well. So this song, written by a member of the church I grew up in, Jim Gent, I'm a Flower in His Garden. And the other one I think goes with it. I'm a flower in his garden, and he cares so much for me that he gave his only son so that from sin I could be free. And when Satan comes to hinder, it's to Jesus that I flee, because he's the living water little flowers like me need. I'm a flower in his garden, and he cares so much for me that he gave his only son so that from sin I could be free. And when Satan comes to hinder, it's to Jesus that I flee, because he's the living water little flowers like me need. I'm a flower in his garden. I want all the world to see that the love I have to offer is the love that he gave me. Even though I may look pretty, it's his beauty that you see. He's the lily of the valley, and he's living within me. I'm a flower in his garden. I want all the world to see that the love I have to offer is the love that he gave me. Even though I may look pretty, it's his beauty that for men in misery. Sin died where the blood fell. I'm so glad His precious blood has covered me. I'm so glad His precious blood has covered me. Even though I may look pretty, it's His beauty that you see. He's the lily of the valley, and He's living within me. I love what these songs say. My favorite part is, even though you might think I look pretty, it's His beauty you're seeing. That's what you're seeing is beauty. It's His beauty. I love this other song that says, flowers of hope sprang up for men in misery. Be a flower of hope that springs up where you are for men in misery. Because I guarantee you, around you, there are people in misery. Even though they might not act like it. You might not know. You might not realize it. I promise. There are people around you in misery. Be a flower of hope that springs up, because this says sin died where the blood fell. When the sin dies, the flower of hope will be there for them. And if the precious blood has covered you, you can share and it can cover them. And they no longer will be men in misery. Genesis 41:38, back to the story of Joseph, says, this to me is just the key. It's the key to Joseph, the key to being like Joseph, the key to being what God wants you to be and ministering to the people where God has you. This is it. And Pharaoh said to his servants, now this is after he interpreted the dreams and realized that it was he, and Joseph said to him, oh, I can't interpret dreams, but God can tell me the dreams. So Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? Not in Egypt they couldn't. He said, can we find anybody like this man? That's why he put him in charge of all of Egypt and everyone's lives and being over the famine. He said, can we find anybody like this that is in him is the Spirit of God? Do you know, among so many people in America now, you may be it. You may be the only person among them that has the Spirit of God, not because they couldn't have it if they wanted, but because they either don't know or they didn't think they wanted it. And so if they don't think they want God, or they don't really know enough to know they need God, you may be it. And this ungodly Pharaoh, serving false gods, trained in them his whole life, looked at this man who interpreted his dreams and said, in him is the Spirit of God. He didn't even know God, but he knew the Spirit of God was in this man because he was so different than everyone else. That was the key to it. He was different because the Spirit of God was in him, that even the ungodly people around him said, can we find anybody like this? In whom is the Spirit of God? If people are not looking at you, now they may not say these exact words, but if they're not in their own mind or somehow saying this person is different than the rest of us, maybe you're not different. Maybe it's not there. I'm not saying you don't have the Spirit of God, but maybe it is not active. Maybe you're not letting it out. Maybe you are not living in it. Maybe you're not really walking in it. Maybe you're concealing it. Maybe if they're not saying, because you should be so different than the vast majority of America now, because so many people are not serving God. You should be the person that people say, there's something different. And it's not you that's different. It's God they're seeing in you that's different. Ephesians 5:18 says, be filled with the Spirit. If you are filled with the Spirit of God, He can use you. He can plant you, even in the most dire circumstances if necessary, because there are people there that He will use you to reach. And even though you may be like Ruth, and you may be like Joseph, and you may not be happy with where you are, and you're like me, and you may say, this is not really where I want to be. If there are people there that you can reach, someday you will be exalted like Joseph or like Ruth, and He will put you in a better position, whether it's the wife of someone or whether it's over the whole country or over something. It doesn't have to necessarily be the whole country, but He will put you, He's not necessarily going to stay in dire conditions and dire circumstances. I so look forward to the day when it is my turn to be exalted to something beyond where I am trapped right now, and to a position that was more what I wanted, like Ruth got what really she had wanted originally when she got married: a good husband, children, family, over a household. She was taken care of. And yet she was a worker. She didn't just like, okay, I'm gonna sit back and do nothing. No, she was a worker. She was working from the beginning. She still would have worked. She would have had a lot of work to do in that household. But she was blessed. And she was blessed because she was faithful to God and bloomed and ministered to the people around her, just like Joseph did, in the worst circumstances of her life, and in Joseph, the worst circumstances of his life. Neither one of them let that stop them from ministering to the people God put in their path. And because they did, there's a verse in the Bible that says, you will be exalted in due season. And until that due season, continue to minister to whoever crosses your path, even if you are in extreme struggling circumstances. And until next week, may you be blessed and your blessings increase. Good night.